In this video, we're going to be modeling the pawn. Eventually, we're going to be modeling all of these chess pieces. Again, some of them might end up looking a little bit different, like your knight piece probably won't end up looking like this one. It's really detailed, and we want to keep these really simple. So the first thing that I want to do is, again, this is just a random image of a bunch of chess pieces. I want to use this as a backdrop item, but again, I don't want all the pieces in there at once. So let's just crop this image real quick and make it a little bit easier to work with. Again, ideally, I want this to be a little bit level, so we can see if we line this line up here up. It's not really perfectly horizontal all the way across, so again, this isn't the perfect reference image. We can rotate it a little bit. See, we get kind of a straight line here. So again, we can just kind of eyeball this and call it good. And let's just clean up. Little weird background color. Again, my background color was purple, but that's fine. So we can do a save as and save this as a pawn chess piece. Let's do a PNG, hit save, and then jump right into Modo. So again, we have our pawn. We can just take this image, drag and drop it into the background. And then we have a backdrop image. So I don't really know what way is the front at this point. So an easy way to do this is I can either look down here, and normally the z-axis, the one going this way from this perspective, would be the front. Or if I get a box, I can go to the front view, hit 3 for polygon, click on that front polygon, and look, and yeah, I was correct. This is the front of the box. So again, this is a 1 meter box. So let's take this guy in item mode. And again, I just come up here, go to part, or the hotkey for that technically would be 5 if you want to select an item as opposed to a vert edge or polygon. And we'll scale that down. And again, we don't really need it to be this big, but it won't hurt anything. We can scale things up or down easily in 3D. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a cylinder, and let's do a 12-sided cylinder. So all these positions set to 0, right click, and we have a cylinder in the scene. I want to be careful I don't accidentally click and drag or do anything weird because I want this to stay perfectly round in the center. So instead of clicking and dragging or anything, I'll just hit the escape key. So from here, I'll take this, scale it down, and I'll actually show you a trick that might help out. Again, we can toggle back and forth between normal and wireframe mode. That can get a little bit daunting. So a different way of doing it is by changing the material. And again, this isn't a material video, but just a quick setting won't hurt. So double click the mesh, hit M for material, or if you hate hotkeys, texture, assign material group. And we can just call this pawn, whatever, it doesn't really matter. If we want, we can change the color, but realistically, we're going to hit OK. Now, a few new things. We have the shading tree over here, and here's that pawn material where it sits. I'm going to open this up. This is the pawn material group. So hit this little caret key to open it, and the material is actually right here. And right here, if I make this menu a little bit larger, I have material trans. Trans is for transparency, so click on that. So I have transparent amount right here, so let's set that to, let's say, 50, and hit enter. And now I have a transparent, opaque material. So let's actually make it not so transparent. So let's put it to like 20%. And now what I can do, if I want to kind of toggle this and make it see-through or not, I can just hit this little material. And if I turn it on, the transparency is on. If I turn it off, all of its material properties are turned off. So again, the only one we really change is that transparency. We can turn that off really easily now. So this is going to be really similar to the baseball bat. I'm not going to go through these steps too slowly. So I'm just going to jump right into the front perspective. Realistically, this thing is still a little bit off, so we can rotate it a tiny bit, but realistically that'll be fine. So I'm going to switch to polygon mode by hitting the 3 key, middle mouse select, drag down, line this up, and scale in. Then I'll actually just grab this guy. And again, I'm being really careful and I'm moving this directly up. I'm not grabbing this guy and moving it diagonal in one way or another. I want to keep this as clean as possible, so I want to kind of rely on these handles and use them as wisely as I can. So this, it kind of shows that there's a little bit of a curve here. We're not actually going to bend this or anything. That's just the perspective of the camera. So we'll have this come out just a little bit. And now a different angle. Let's double click this edge. Turn off this backdrop item. I'm just going to hit B to bevel. I'm just going to give this a really slight bevel just so this looks a little bit more round. Somewhere around in there. Now I'm going to grab just this bottom polygon. I can turn my backdrop item back on. Go to my front view. So now what I'm going to do is, instead of just scaling this in, because again we can see this is adding to the curve, I'm actually going to do an extrude. So mesh edit, extrude, right click, R to scale, scale that in a little bit. So now let's see what that result actually was. So what I did was, it was right here, I extruded it and scaled it in, and I just scaled it in on this little cyan guy. So it's not any thicker or thinner, it's just overall the body of the piece is going to be not as wide. So let's line this up roughly to the body, and again you can see that it doesn't line up perfectly, but it'll be fine for this demonstration. So extrude again, pull this down. I'm going to pull this all the way down here. I'm going to base this off the centers of things as opposed to how this kind of curves. So now what I'm going to do is grab this loop and actually show you a trick real quick. I'm going to grab this and extend it out to where it meets up with like this edge and this edge. Now we have this curve in here. So how I'm going to handle this curve is I'm actually going to do a loop slice. I have a bunch of weird settings, so we'll just set that back to 1. Put my loop about right here. Again, I'm just eyeballing this. Scale it in. I'm going to scale it in a little bit farther than I'd think that I'd need to. Spacebar to drop the tool. B to bevel. Grab the blue guy. And you can see how the bevel starts to come out and it makes this curved shape. So again, now we have a bunch of big steps. So if I undo that, if I don't scale it in as far, spacebar, B to bevel, grab this blue guy, pull it out. That lines up a little bit better. Again, before we were out here and here. So again, depending on that first scale, if I scale it all the way in, it's going to have a different result than if it's kind of scaled out. And we're going to utilize that little bevel trick a little bit more in here. So let's middle mouse, grab the bottom, extrude, right click, R to scale, scale that out, spacebar to drop the tool. Extrude, right click, pull it down. So this one's a little bit unique. We're going to have a little bit of a curve kind of right here, and then it's going to do a little bit of a curve right here. So let's kind of do this in a 2-stage process. Let's take it to here, do an extrude, pull it down. Actually, let's pull it down to here. So this, middle mouse click. We'll say this right here is going to simulate this little thickness right here. So now I'm grabbing this center guy right here. I don't want to scale this up. It looks like it's doing the same thing. Let's scale it way down. Go to the side view, and you can see that it's still just as wide. We want this to be uniform. So as I'm scaling this, I'm grabbing this center cyan guy and scaling it up or down. So we can scale this out, scale it down a little bit. About right there should work. And now let's do a loop slice. Put this about in the middle. R to scale. Scale that in. Spacebar. B to bevel. And we can pull that. And again, I can mess with this a little bit more and get this curvature perfect. I'm not really going to worry about it. Make it a little bit thicker at the base. There we go. So now to get this round area, I'm going to kind of do a similar thing. We'll select 2 edges and do a loop slice. Hit uniform. And now I'm going to hit R to scale after dropping the tool. Scale this out. Now I'm going to bevel this edge. Let's see what happens. About like that. That's probably fine. So again, I can tweak this a little bit more if I'm not really happy with it. So I could pull out even more than this, beat a bevel, do something like this. So again, this is something you can kind of just have fun with, get it kind of where you want it. But again, it's going to be that same process of doing a loop slice, scaling it up, beat a bevel, and then setting that bevel where you want it. And I can come out here, turn this off, and kind of look at this. And if I'm not really liking things, I can kind of adjust things a little bit and get this where I like it. Because again, this is kind of your piece. You can modify it a little bit. It's totally okay. So now we just have a little extra lip that comes down. So let's just turn this off and just eyeball this. We're going to do an extrude, scale, extrude, pull down, loop slice, scale, beat a bevel, and we'll call this good. So again, the bottom part of the chest piece is good. Again, if you're like me and you hate n-gons, again, we haven't really went over n-gons and why they're good or bad. Usually they're bad. You can do one more extrude and join this so you have a little one of these with all the triangles at the bottom. You don't really need to. So now for the top of this, we need a sphere. So realistically, I don't want to try to extrude out a sphere. I definitely could. It wouldn't really take that long as I'm scaling, rotating, whatever, this piece by piece. But I'm going to show you guys a new tool. So just undoing that. Actually going to grab this polygon and delete it. Switch to edge mode, double click, and if you remember, we set this to 12 edges going around. So let's make a sphere, and we want it to have 12 edges going around total. Right now it's set to 24, which is quite a bit. Set that to 12, hit enter. Now up and down, we want these to be a little bit closer to squares as opposed to rectangles. So it's at 13. Again, you just want to stay away from odd numbers. So let's drop that down to 8 and see how that looks. That should probably be fine. So from here, we'll grab this, double click, click and drag. So now we have a huge top. This probably isn't how we want the piece. So we can scale it down and get this to fit. And if I look at this, if I scale it to where this little guy meets up with this guy, let's see how this chest piece would look. So if we delete him, move this down, it's a little bit bigger, so we'll scale it down a little bit. This is kind of what we have. It doesn't really look right. It looks a little bit goofy. And again, this is a separate material. It just comes in with that default material, so I can double click, hit M for material, set it to pawn, hit OK, and now it's transparent. So what we can do from here is we can either grab all these polygons, or I'm sorry, all these vertices. I can do the edges of the polygons, it doesn't really matter. And I could scale this down for it to fit. Somewhere around in there would look fine. Or what I could do is maybe let's remove this loop of polygons. So we'll just lasso select really carefully, get all those, hit delete. Now let's scale this down, put it into place. Again, being careful that we're scaling, making sure we're scaling from the center. So we'll put this about right here. And we really don't need this backdrop image anymore. So what I'm going to do is look at this and make sure things line up. Double click, it says 12 edges. Double click, 12 edges. So if you remember what tool we can use to kind of bring these together, let's actually scale this guy in just a little bit more. Bring that down. There we go. So double click this edge, double click this edge, go to edges, go to bridge, and right click. Our segments are to 2, we can set that to 1. We really don't need the extra loop in there. Then if you want, you could maybe even, since these are now, it's all one piece, I could even grab this, do a little bevel right here, maybe get rid of that edge. And now this is a little bit softer. Actually, I don't think it does really make that big of a difference. But from here we have a pretty good pawn piece. And the only other thing that I do is once I'm done modeling, I really don't need this to be transparent anymore. So clicking on my material reference, we don't want that one, we want material transparency, transparent amount, set it to 0, hit OK, and this piece is good to go. So again, we're going to want to save this, file, save as, save it as a pawn, and I can just throw this right on my desktop, or actually have, oops, wrong folder, KCAD folder right here, throw it in here, and we're good to go.